Hello and welcome, my name is Ajaxpost and we're back here with the fourth and apparently final development highlight videos for Transport Fever from Urban Games and Good Shepherd, presented as usual by Tom, the community manager from Urban Games, but as usual I'm going to mute his commentary so that you can hear me. But why would you want to do that? Well, that's the way these things work. And I'm just going to be going through what he's telling us, what he's showing us, and just giving my impressions of what this might mean to how Transport Fever 2 works, what options it offers, and just how gloriously gorgeous it looks. Look at that. That is a fabulous looking cityscape, isn't it? With those wonderful streetcars and buses and all the rest of it. Traffic lights, of course, we've seen before. That's going to be a wonderful addition. Interesting new challenge to the game. And at this point, Tom is telling us that there are going to be around 300 vehicles in the new game, which is a more definitive number and perhaps an increase on the number that we saw or was mentioned to us in the announcement video, where we were told we were going to get over 200 vehicles. So we're talking 300, which is quite a nice number. And it has to be that larger number because we have a whole new continent to play with as well now. It's not just Europe and North America, but we're now getting Asia. So we're going to be seeing vehicles from China, from Japan and from Russia, which is going to be great, obviously, because we know we have a lot of players of the existing Transport Fever from all of those countries. As you can just tell that from the modding community. There's a wonderfully large and productive team, a couple of teams actually, from China, Japan and from Russia, creating some quite awesome mods. Now, Tom here is talking to us about the new detail levels on our vehicles. Now, I don't spend a lot of time in real close-up zooming in on the vehicles, but that is quite impressive. Even more so is the new detail they're putting into all the animations on the vehicles, steam trains in particular, the flaps on the aeroplanes. It's all going to be adding to the immersion that we're seeing within the game. It just makes it feel more real, easier to engage with. Now, this is an interesting point. Tom is talking to us here about the fact that we'll be able to watch passengers, see the passengers all the way through their journey on the routes that you're providing them, including aeroplanes and boats and trains and buses, obviously. Now, previously we did see the passengers all sat in their seats, or on crowded buses, for example, standing up. But I think on some vehicles, like planes and boats in particular, that was rather limited. But we're now going to be seeing that in full, so they're always going to be visible to us, which is, again, a really nice improvement to the engagement, the immersion in the game. Isn't that a lovely looking tram? Freight aircraft. Now this is it, and adding a new dimension perhaps to the game. I mean, the whole, as we saw in the previous highlights videos, the whole freight mechanic is changing quite substantially in terms of what goods you can deliver to what cities. Now, the ability to have freight planes in the base game does perhaps make it more possible to establish profitable long-distance cargo routes. Now, I've never actually played on a really large, huge experimental map, but I know there's quite a few players that do, and they're often commenting that it can be difficult to establish profitable long-distance cargo routes, simply because it takes too long or it's too expensive to deliver freight over those distances. The cities won't demand goods at that price or taking that long to turn up. Perhaps, now that we've got aircraft delivering freight, those long-distance routes can be made profitable, because I'm going to assume that these aircraft, certainly the later game ones, fly substantially faster than a train can travel along the tracks. So that, again, it just adds an interesting, fascinating new challenge to the game. Now here, we're talking about road vehicles in particular. I'm assuming road vehicles in particular because we're seeing road vehicles on the screen, but I think it's more relevant here perhaps. But Tom does again just say for certain types of cargo, certain types of vehicles, we're going to get higher capacity specialised vehicles coming out. So for example, I think in the existing game Transport Fever, you'll get a truck which carries everything regardless. It just looks like a truck with a big box in the back, and it'll carry whatever cargo it can pick up and deliver. Whereas in the modding community, we do have some really fabulous mods, again, particularly for trucks, where you just have a basic cab and it only decides on which wagon to attach when it picks up the cargo. So if it's picking up fuel or oil, it will attach a liquid container. It will attach a fuel container wagon to the back of the cab, or if it's carrying planks or logs, it will attach, as we see here, a stake car wagon. And I'm just going to be interested to see in the base game whether we get totally separated out vehicles, or it uses that same approach where you decide on what cab you want to use and then it attaches the appropriate wagon as and when it picks up the cargo at that truck stop. Now this is fascinating. This particular bit of the commentary, in particular, the vehicle is fine. I don't have an issue with that. But Tom says something quite interesting. And again, I'm not quite sure if I got quite the nuance of what he was saying. With all due apologies, my sad poor English ears didn't, I don't think, quite picked up everything that he said in his German accent. So I may have misconstrued something. But what I heard him saying, modern vehicles with different emissions can be bought. I'm wondering if what he's suggesting to us there is that, a bit like in real life at the moment, certainly the 21st century in particular, and going forward, that vehicles come in a multitude of different engine types. So where you might choose your vehicle to have a diesel or petrol engine, or perhaps a hybrid, or a wholly entirely electric vehicle, are we going to be seeing that selection available to us in Transport Fever 2? So when we buy a truck in sort of 2019, whatever, 2019, that's probably more realistic, isn't it? I'm not sure the game stretches to the 20,000ths. Will we get a choice of cab? Can we say, I want, because in this city I need to reduce emissions, I want my vehicle to be a hybrid or electric to carry these goods around the city, or passengers for that matter? Is that what we're going to see? Because as we saw in the previous video, city growth can be limited if you have too many evil emissions, pollution in the city, as we see in many other city builder games. So is this one way of addressing that? You're not just putting your trains underground to get all those nasty fumes out of the way, but can you actually address it by having different types of engine in your road vehicles? That's going to be an interesting thing to see, most definitely. And as that vehicle goes there, now this point again he makes is something he's hinting at, and I'm not quite sure quite what impact it will have on the gameplay itself. What he's saying to us is what we already know, that you have vehicles over time with larger capacities, bigger vehicles, particularly true perhaps of aeroplanes, and what he's saying to us here is that where you need to upgrade the infrastructure. So like in Transport Fever at the moment, we have small and larger airports. Are we going to see in Transport Fever 2 that you actually have to lay down a large airport to get the larger capacity aircraft? A bit like in the real world. Now, I've not played, no, I have played a little bit with larger aircraft capacities later in the game, in sort of 1990s, 2000s and so on. And I have sometimes had them flying from small airports. Are we going to see now an actual real challenge that you've had a small airport somewhere on the outskirts of your city for years and the city has grown around it, but if you want to actually use larger capacity modern aircraft, you're going to have to build a larger airport. So planning could again be an interesting new dynamic in the game. That could be fascinating. Now this is where it starts getting really interesting. This I think is kind of the heart of what Tom is telling us in the Vehicles Development Highlights video. This is the new line manager. It's looking a whole lot more elegant, a lot easier to use than the existing one, largely because of the new overlay style that we're using. Again, you can filter and search for lines, which we can at the moment in the line manager, But this bit is particularly interesting. Look at that. Yeah, you see that? At each individual stop, you can select whether you want to unload or load cargo. Now, this has always been an issue in the current game for players who sort of focus on cargo and getting really into detail in designing their routes to get cargo exactly where it wants to be. Because in the current game, it's the AI itself decides what's the best route for your cargo to get from source to destination. Here it looks like we're going to have much more control. Now this does obviously feed into the fact that in Transport Fever 2 cities are only going to require a limited number. I think it was 2, if I remember correctly, 2 types of cargo per city. And you will need to sort of focus your cargo routes more accurately to make sure that your cargo does get to where it needs to be on the map in those particular cities. And here you can fine-tune that to actually load and unload. This has always kind of been an issue, I think, with some players where they've wanted to fine-tune, and now it looks like we're going to be able to do that. Now, the one thing I'm not seeing here is the full load waiting. Actually, we are seeing that. There is an indicator. You see the little bucket against the stop, which is what we're familiar with on the current game with loading and unloading. And this does, so you could have full load and also decide to unload at certain stops certain types of good. This is going to make the whole thing that much more challenging. It's going to be a good word. More realistic as well, which is going to be good. But this, I like that change a lot. Now here we're looking again at the line manager. Again, this is not final software, so we're not quite sure how much of this look and feel we're going to see. I imagine this is fairly close, to be honest, to what we're going to see in the final game. At this stage of development, I can't imagine they're playing around with an entirely hypothetical UI for these development videos. Now this is the line manager. Look at that! Quantity. You don't need to press the clone button to buy new vehicles in multiples. You can simply say, I'd like 3 of those buses, I want 4 of those trains, I want 15 of those wagons. You just click on the quantity there, and you've got your checkout cart, of course. Buy those for so many. Really nice. And what we're looking at here, this is the vehicle manager. Now this was a nice little touch. I've often thought this to myself. I want to use the same train on this line. I want to add another of the same train that I'm already using on the line. But can I find it in my huge great list of modded vehicles? I always have trouble doing that. Now what he's telling us here is that we can actually clone vehicles that are already on the line. I'm not quite sure that the language there accurately describes what we're doing, but I'm not sure how you would accurately describe what we want to do here. So what we're saying here is I have a Vectron locomotive with these wagons on the line, and I want to add another one of that exact same consist to the line without having to put one of the vehicles into the depot to clone it, or try to remember what combination of vehicles you were using. Nice extra touch. And here, look, we can look at our vehicle list and we can select not just one, not just all, but a combination. We can select which vehicles we want to affect, and we can swap them around to different lines. Oh, here's a new thing, maintenance. You remember how in Transport Fever vehicles would age gradually over time, and they would get more expensive and they'd get dirtier and rustier and just look more unsightly? We have some control over that now in Transport Fever 2. We can set a maintenance level. So that will obviously affect how quickly vehicles age. So I'm assuming they will still age. They will still get more expensive, rustier and look less pretty over time. But how quickly that happens is going to be a factor of the maintenance that you're paying on the upkeep of those vehicles while they're running. nice addition. Again, just adding to the challenge. This I approve of. If this stays throughout vehicle management through its life, I really didn't like the way they changed the colour setting with one of the last updates to Transport Fever. They just gave you a drop down and you couldn't actually see which colour you'd already applied. Was it the dark green, the slightly less dark green, was it the bright yellow, or the slightly darker bright yellow? Trying to match from the existing colour palette was difficult. If this looks like it should go back to more or less what it was when Transport Fever first came out, which is a much simpler, a much more intuitive and much more useful way of changing the colour on your vehicles. And that was it, I think, for Development Highlights video 4. Let me just check my notes. Is there anything else we need to mention? I don't think there is. That's it. So thank you very much for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this video, give us a like, a thumbs up would be very much appreciated. If you've got any thoughts, comments, suggestions on what we're seeing here and what you expect to see in the final game when it comes out, as he says here, in Q4 2009, not too much longer to wait, just drop a note into the comments box below. It'd be very much appreciated. And of course, if you've not already done so, please do subscribe to the channel, and that way you'll know when I upload another one of these or any of my other videos in the various Let's Play series that I'm doing. One final word, Tom did say at the beginning of the video that we will be getting a gameplay video at some point before release, presumably at the point they announce the release date, which he says is sometime soon. Now, he's only got a couple more months, 2.5 months more or less, to get the game out in Q4 2019. So we should be seeing that reasonably soon, and I'm really looking forward to that. We do know, however, that the closed beta has probably started, or at least they notified all the people who would be partaking, who would be joining in the beta testing process just a few days ago. I did apply. Unfortunately, I didn't make it through the cut, which is a great shame. I would have liked to have seen the game early on and perhaps added to the QA of the game and just give my feedback to it and learn a bit more about how the whole thing works, so I could sort of be a little bit ahead of the game, as it were, in being able to offer advice and guidance and some sort of tricks of the trade, if you will, to the game when it does come out. But then again, thinking about it, being a beta tester is quite a commitment. And not being part of that process for Transport Fever 2 does mean that I can carry on delivering more regular content to you and looking at other games in the meantime. So I'm a little bit sad, but I can deal with it. And we're still going to be getting the game at the end of the day later this year, which is going to be fabulous. So thank you once again for joining me today. Hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon. But until then, bye bye for now.